The moment I walked into that courtroom, my daughter let out a nervous giggle. My son-in-law shook his head like I was a joke he'd already won. Then the judge looked up, and his face went white. His pen slipped from his hand as he whispered a name nobody else in that room recognized. They thought they were locking away a senile old man. They had no idea they'd just declared war on a ghost. It started with an insult I was supposed to swallow quietly. Sunday dinner at my daughter Claire and her husband Victor Ashworth's sprawling estate outside Phoenix, the two of them talking through me like furniture. Victor bragged about a 9-figure resort deal without looking up from his phone. I'm Edward Vance, 72. 10 years ago, after my wife Helen died, I sold our home and bought the guest house on Claire's property to stay close to her. Only my grandson Miles, 16, ever looked at me like I still existed. When he invited me to his baseball game, Victor cut in before I could answer. "Don't bother Grandpa. He needs his rest. He's old." Claire giggled along. I said nothing. I mistook my silence for patience. It was permission. 3 days later, Victor showed up with an expensive bottle of wine my cardiologist had banned years ago. Pure theater. He needed a $500,000 bridge loan against my guest house to clear permits on his Ohio resort deal. 6 months, he promised, and he'd hand back $700,000. I said no. I was 72, past my risk-taking years, and that money was for my retirement and medical bills. The mask dropped instantly. "You live on our land," he snapped, not knowing that when I bought the guest house, I'd also bought the 2 acres his mansion sat on. His 99-year lease was with me, at $1 a year. He stormed off with a threat trailing behind him. A week later, I woke at 3 a.m. with chest pain crushing through me. I called Claire first. She answered groggy and annoyed, mentioned a charity gala the next morning, told me to call 911 if it was that bad, and hung up without asking how I felt. I took a cab to the ER alone. Discharged by 9, I came home to find her car parked outside a spa. Not any gala. The next morning, a courier delivered a legal petition. Victor and Claire Ashworth, petitioners. Edward Vance, respondent. Emergency conservatorship, claiming I was mentally incapacitated. Attached was a diagnosis from a Dr. Marcus Cole describing dementia and paranoid delusions. I had never met anyone by that name in my life. I walked straight to the main house. Claire flinched at the sight of the envelope. Victor tried concerned son-in-law theater, twisting my heart scare into proof I couldn't manage my own affairs. When I pushed back, the mask came off completely. "See you in court, old man. Go find yourself a public defender." That was the moment the invisible old man they thought they knew died, and something else woke up. Behind a false wall in my closet was a room they never knew existed. A biometric lock, monitors, file cabinets, an encrypted line. Victor thought I'd been some mid-level accountant. He had no idea that 30 years ago in Washington, I'd been the Department of Justice's lead forensic investigator. Executives, senators, corrupt CEOs, they called me the Scalpel. I'd sent a dozen powerful men to prison with a single spreadsheet before I buried that man to care for Helen through her illness, and later, to become an invisible grandfather. I called an old contact, Diana Reyes, whose father had worked cases with me decades ago. She arrived the next morning with a slim briefcase and eyes like cold steel. Within an hour of reviewing the petition, she called back. Dr. Cole wasn't a psychologist at all. He was a dentist, license revoked 5 years earlier for insurance fraud and running a pill mill. That answered what, not how. So I kept digging. When Cole had been arrested, his bail was covered by a shell company, Ashworth Holdings. Victor hadn't found this disgraced dentist last week. He'd owned him for 5 years, a compromised asset kept on a leash for exactly this moment. I followed the money next. Victor had layered his companies through shell entities, but reused the same personal email on every filing. That thread led me to a private equity fund called Ridgeline Capital, the vulture kind. His resort project was $50 million over budget, buried in liens, his liquidity reports faked. A week earlier, the day after I refused his loan, Ridgeline had issued an emergency capital call, $5 million in 10 days, or they'd seize everything he owned. He hadn't wanted my money as an investment. He'd needed it as a stopgap to survive. But lawsuits cost money too. Where had a nearly bankrupt man found the cash for lawyers and a bribed expert? My mind went to Helen's Memorial Foundation, the one I'd funded with millions after her death, with Claire as managing director. I called the bank and invoked my founder's rights. The statement arrived in minutes. What should have held over $3 million now held $400,000. Buried in the transfers, payments to Ashworth Holdings, payments to a shell company for event planning. And on every authorization, the signature wasn't Victor's, it was Claire's. My daughter wasn't a bystander. She was an active partner, looting her own mother's memorial fund to bankroll a lawsuit meant to have me declared insane. I called Diana back with new instructions. We weren't playing defense anymore. I asked for the name of Victor's lender, Ridgeline Capital. I knew that name. Decades ago, I'd cleared a young trader wrongly targeted in a fraud case instead of burying him. He'd built Ridgeline from nothing and told me once if I ever needed anything to call. I called. I bought Victor's $5 million debt outright, off the books, no warning to him. I dressed for the conservatorship hearing in a charcoal suit I hadn't worn since testifying before Congress. Claire giggled when she saw me. Victor smirked. The judge looked up to identify the respondent and froze, pen clattering to his desk. "My God," he whispered. "Is that really him?" He'd been a young attorney on a fraud case I'd built 30 years earlier. He turned to Victor's lawyer. "That's the scalpel. Good luck." Their star witness delivered his rehearsed diagnosis before Diana rose with a single sheet of paper and forced him to admit under oath he wasn't a licensed psychologist. He was a dentist with a revoked license, paid $25,000 by Ashworth Holdings 3 days before signing the fraudulent diagnosis. The judge had him arrested for perjury on the spot. Victor testified next, painting himself as a concerned son-in-law, until Diana walked him into admitting his project was $50 million over budget and in default on a $5 million call. Cornered on where the bribe money came from, he had no answer. I did. The foundation. Claire broke down, realizing the fees she'd approved were theft from her own mother's charity. I stood and told the judge I hadn't come to defend my sanity. I'd come to file a criminal complaint, laying out the embezzlement, then naming my daughter's role directly. The signature on every check was hers. Victor sneered that I had nothing, that I was a broke old man in a guest house. I let the silence sit, then nodded to Diana. She placed a foreclosure and seizure notice in front of him. His lender had sold his defaulted debt. I was the buyer. Everything he thought was his, the mansion, the cars, the company, now belonged to me. The evidence was airtight. A jury convicted Victor on 12 counts of fraud and embezzlement, 10 years in state prison. Claire's lawyer begged me to write a leniency letter, claiming she'd been controlled. I refused. She took a plea: felony misuse of charitable funds, 3 years probation, full restitution, and 2,000 hours of community service in a memory care ward, feeding and bathing people who had truly lost their minds, the very thing she'd tried to falsely brand me as. 6 months later, the mansion sold at auction. I sold the guest house too. Half the proceeds rebuilt the foundation under new leadership. The other half went into a trust for Miles, locked until he turns 25. I was packing the last boxes in my hidden office when Claire appeared in the doorway, hollowed out in a faded volunteer smock, looking years older than 6 months should have made her. She asked why I'd let it go this far instead of stopping it sooner. I told her if I had, she'd have learned nothing. She'd have hated me for a week and gone right back to him. I reminded her of the $50 she'd stolen from her mother's purse at 10 years old. How Helen had quietly forgiven her and replaced the money herself. How Claire never once paid for that. She just kept stealing bigger things. The books had to balance eventually. I handed her an envelope, an address, 3 months' rent, a bus pass, and told her after that she was on her own. I watched her walk away. I'm 72. I've retired twice now, once from my career, once from being the silent old man they thought I was. I learned that silence isn't patience, it's permission, if you let it run long enough. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the books to balance. And finally, they do. If Edward's story moved you, hit like, tell us in the comments what you would have done in his place, and subscribe to Aftermath Tales for more powerful stories like this one.